Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, stepped forward in what seemed like an impromptu show of strength, challenging the rising political firebrand Representative Jasmine Crockett. She likely thought it would be a moment that stamped her authority on the room. But what happened next turned the entire spectacle upside down. In just 14 seconds, Crockett delivered a precise, unapologetic, and electrifying response that didn't just silence Kamala, it shook the entire political theater. What followed was not just an exchange of words but a moment that redefined public perception and left millions stunned. Stay with us as we unravel the full story behind the confrontation that's setting Washington on fire. It was a routine press event at first glance, a panel where policy minds and prominent figures had gathered to engage on topics that affect everyday Americans, issues like healthcare access, the growing income divide, and the repeated calls for accountability from the nation's most powerful institutions. Kamala Harris, a veteran of debates, former prosecutor, and now the sitting vice president, had taken the stage with confidence, but seated just a few feet away was Jasmine Crockett, a name that has become synonymous with fearless, unfiltered truth. Crockett has made headlines for her unapologetic stands on systemic inequity, her bold rebukes of party complacency, and her dedication to the people over political polish. As the discussion turned tense, few could predict what would unfold in the seconds that followed. Kamala Harris, clearly trying to reassert her influence within the Democratic ranks, began by addressing what she described as a performative rhetoric from members of Congress who, in her words, chose viral moments over real legislation. She didn't mention Crockett by name, but the insinuation was clear. The room fell into a hushed stillness, sensing the undercurrent of challenge. Jasmine Crockett, unmoved, adjusted her microphone, paused for a breath, and in just 14 seconds delivered a rebuttal so sharp, so precise, it seemed to pierce through the entire political charade. Crockett looked directly at Kamala and said, "If speaking the truth about the people's pain sounds like performance to you, maybe it's because you've been performing for too long. This isn't theater, Madam Vice President, it's survival." The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, murmurs, and stunned silence engulfed the panel. Even the moderator, who had been attempting to keep the tone civil, momentarily froze. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the delivery, and the unflinching moral clarity in Crockett's voice that made those 14 seconds unforgettable. Kamala Harris, to her credit, attempted to recover. She chuckled politely, perhaps trying to diffuse the moment with humor, but the damage had been done. The vice president, once hailed as a generational voice of justice, suddenly looked caught off guard, almost disconnected from the raw urgency that Crockett had so powerfully brought to the surface. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Harris, but for a political establishment that has long underestimated the new wave of progressives like Jasmine Crockett. Social media erupted. Clips of the exchange began circulating within minutes, with hashtags like #14secondsilence and #CrockettClapback trending across platforms. Journalists, pundits, and activists weighed in, many praising Crockett for saying what so many Americans have felt, that the leadership they trusted to bring about change has, in some ways, lost touch with the urgency of the moment. Crockett's words weren't just a rebuttal to Kamala, they were a reflection of a broader national fatigue with political performance. The timing couldn't have been more critical, with the Democratic Party facing internal friction over its direction, and with elections looming. Every moment of authenticity matters. Kamala Harris has struggled with approval ratings and a lack of defining achievements during her tenure as vice president. For someone whose rise to power was once heralded as historic and transformative, her tenure has been marked more by cautious rhetoric and missed opportunities. Crockett, on the other hand, represents a demographic that's hungry for unfiltered truth, for someone who doesn't dilute their passion in the name of political expediency. What made the exchange even more significant was that Crockett didn't follow it up with additional jabs or grandstanding. She didn't gloat, she simply turned her attention back to the people, her constituents, their issues, their pain. That single moment became more than a viral soundbite. It became a case study in how real power doesn't come from titles or podiums, but from moral courage and proximity to the struggles of everyday people. Kamala's silence, though only a few seconds long, felt eternal in the age of instant commentary, and in that silence, an unintended message was conveyed that the political elite, even those who claim to stand for justice, are not immune to being held accountable. Harris, once seen as the future of the Democratic Party, appeared to embody the very detachment and defensiveness that younger voices in the party are now challenging with increasing force. But let's not misread Crockett's sharpness as disrespect, it was righteous urgency. It was the voice of a woman who has spent her career standing in courtrooms and Congress fighting for those who rarely have a voice at all. And perhaps that's what made it so impactful. She wasn't speaking to Kamala Harris. She was speaking for the single mother in Texas who works 3 jobs and still can't afford rent. She was speaking for the black and brown communities decimated by policy negligence. She was speaking for a generation that's tired of polite conversations and ready for transformative action. Since that moment, the calls for Jasmine Crockett to assume greater leadership roles have intensified. Petitions have popped up, urging Democratic leadership to recognize her as a critical voice in shaping the party's future. Editorials from major newspapers began framing her as the conscience of Congress, a modern-day truth-teller with no interest in currying favor with the establishment. Meanwhile, Kamala's team has gone into damage control mode, attempting to paint the exchange as a healthy debate among allies. But the public perception has already calcified. Harris looked out of touch, and Crockett looked like the future. It's a striking example of how quickly political power can shift in the digital age. 14 seconds might seem like a flash, but in that flash, Crockett wielded more influence than most press conferences or campaign tours managed to achieve. It was a masterclass in political clarity, delivered not with theatrics, but with the raw power of truth, and that's what millions connected with. Behind the scenes, staffers from both camps reportedly had words after the panel. Harris's aides tried to spin the moment as a misunderstanding, while Crockett's team made it clear that their representative was not there for political games. She wasn't interested in personal attacks, only in accountability. And it's that posture, direct, disciplined, and defiant, that is endearing her to a rapidly growing base across the country. What makes Crockett even more formidable is her consistency. This wasn't a one-off moment. Her career is littered with instances where she's put principle before popularity, often challenging both Republicans and Democrats when they stray from serving the people. Her rising popularity isn't just about one moment, it's about a body of work that reflects deep authenticity. And as Americans grow increasingly tired of doublespeak and carefully rehearsed political theater, Crockett's brand of unfiltered leadership is gaining momentum. In the days that followed, Kamala Harris avoided directly referencing the moment, but her subsequent public statements took on a noticeably more humble tone, as if she too understood the significance of what happened. Crockett, on the other hand, returned to her district and doubled down on what matters most: housing reform, healthcare access, criminal justice transformation. While others played damage control, she played defense for the people she serves. This confrontation also forces us to reconsider the nature of political power. It shows us that titles mean little when faced with fearless truth. It reminds us that sometimes the loudest voice is not the one that commands the room but the one that cuts through the noise. And Crockett did just that. In 14 seconds, she silenced a sitting vice president, not with disrespect, but with clarity. And that clarity is what people are desperate for right now. Whether you support Harris or Crockett, one thing is undeniable: this moment was a wake-up call. It told us that the future of politics doesn't belong to those who rely on their resumes alone. It belongs to those who earn trust in real time, by saying what needs to be said, no matter the audience. Jasmine Crockett didn't just have a moment, she created a movement. And as the dust settles, it's clear that her voice isn't going anywhere. In fact, it may soon be the loudest one in the room. If you found this story as powerful as we did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more in-depth political commentary, and ring the bell so you never miss a moment that matters. Let us know in the comments, do you think Jasmine Crockett is the future of the Democratic Party? We'll see you in the next video.